Hello math fans, continue our little discussion on solving and simplifying Bootcamp. Here we're going to talk about inverse pairs, which is, we'll talk about this many times throughout the term. It's just the foundational things you need to solve the types of equations we see in calculus. And this is going to feel patronizing, but you got to bear with me. So first we need to know the basic pairs. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and then we'll talk about powers. And we'll go from, in this video, we'll go from level 1, which is those things there, to level 4, the exploding universe. But really you just need to know, if I need to solve this, I need to get rid of 3. I need to subtract 3 from both sides. And you know this, but there's a moment in this process when people get lost. And I like you to identify that moment because it's actually just the same thing. Here I'm going to add 2 to both sides. Here I'm going to divide. I'm trying to undo a 5. So this is going to be a 12/5. Here I'm going to multiply. I'm trying to undo a 4. So it's going to be 28. Those are the inverse pairs. They have weird names. They have buttons on your calculator to push. There is a button that says, how do you solve that first equation? Well, I need to take 10, and then I need to do the inverse of adding 3. So if you've never thought about it that way, that's what's happening. Every new inverse is just another button we're pushing here. Okay, that's how I think about solving. So as we build solving tools, we'll add. We'll have powers and roots. Later we'll have exponentials and logs. We'll have trig and inverse trig. To me, it's all the same. It's like almost the messiest names are addition and multiplication. That's weird. Okay, so let's graduate to level 2, and we'll finish this ultimately getting to powers. Okay, so there's level 1, no problemo. Let's shrink it down, and let's jump to level 2. And this is just mostly a perspective thing, because I find people are like, fine, fine, fine. And so I'm trying to identify where the loss is, because this week I've had people saying, I got no idea what's going on with these powers. And so let's try to diagnose that. So next, the next most challenging you faced long ago was, what do I do if I have combinations of those things? That required you knew your arithmetic, your distributions, your fractions. And watch my video on solving linear equations, but it's really about order. So if I'm trying to get this x by itself, I need to undo a -1 and I need to undo a ×2. So I know that the 2 things I need to undo, I know how to do them. I need to add 1 and divide by 2. The only thing I can get wrong is the order. And that's that order of operations stuff you did years ago. But the right order is to add 1 to both sides. So the only way you can get solving wrong is if you get the order wrong or you push the wrong button. So if you never really thought about it this way, this is what we're doing when we can solve with inverses. And you can even type it in as a series of inverses. 6, and then I want to undo the 1, enter, 7, and then I want to undo the ×2, enter, done. 3.5. Okay, same thing here. Now you could expand here, or you could undo the ×3. So I find some people haven't seen this, and that's why I'm taking a moment. Please hang with me for a moment. So I'm undoing, I'm dividing by 3, I'm subtracting 5. Great. Now this one is more of referring to a previous video, but the reason this one looks messy is because the fraction. So step 1 is we multiply everything by x. Haha. We get all the like terms, so we're going to do 9x, and then we need to undo a ×9. So we divide by 9. X is 3/9, or 1/3. And we like the fact that we could go back and check. We could plug that in there. We get 3/3, which is 9 minus 2 is 7, and we would know we're right. So that's the first place things can sometimes go wrong, and I've already seen that this week, is your order of multiplication and subtraction is somehow wrong, or you are simplifying a fraction wrong. But I think we can handle that step. So, okay, I think we can handle level 2 is combining the 2 foundational things, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Because it's really good to identify where your confusion is. So we've made it through level 1. We've made it through level 2. And now let's add something to the story. So level 3 is, what do we do if there's a power? What can we say about that? Move this over a little bit. Well, we need a name. What's the name? The name is a root. Why is it a root? Well, why is the opposite of addition called subtraction? I counter. Why is the opposite of multiplication? It has a name, and the name is root. It's simpler than a lot of the other names. Just like with addition and subtraction and order of operations, you had to at some point learn the basics of it. So what is the button in your calculator that gets rid of a square? It's a square root. We have two ways of writing that, as a 1/2 power as a square root. Now there is something interesting, and it's when there's an even power. It's the only time you have to think about this. But the problem is, if I have something squared equals, let's say 9, there's actually two answers. And the two answers it's 3 and -3. So the only time you ever have to worry about this plus or minus is very specifically when you go from a square to solving, in which case you're going to choose both the positive and negative root. So what we would write here, and the button that we would push that undoes the squaring, is the square root of 7. If this is a review for that's fine, but I find a lot of people, this is where the confusion is. So now I have a button. There's two ways to type that in. In this calculator I can do, there's actually a button that says second square root 7, enter. If I want the negative, I take the negative of it. The other way to do it is 7 caret, and then in parentheses put 1/2 or 0.5. That accomplishes the same thing. So the other way to write it is this. We define those to be the same. There's many good reasons we do that. Okay, for cubes, we don't have the same problem with the plus or minus, because if you think about with a cube, if I have 3 numbers multiplied together that give me 8, it can't be a negative, because a negative times a negative would be a negative. So there's only one answer, and it's called the cube root. This is the one some students were telling me this week they'd never seen a cube root. I think you had, just looked funny in the problem. So we typically write it this way. You could write it this way. There's two ways to type it into this calculator. I always use the 1/3 power because that's more getting us ready for calculus. Boom. Or you can do, there's a button. I always have to remember how to do it. I think you have to hit 3, and then you hit this little root thing that's next to the caret, and then you hit 8. I find that less intuitive, so I don't do it. Just like the other inverses, you can also go the other way. You can add something, you subtract something. You can multiply, you can divide. You can do a power, you can do a root. So if we want to undo a root, we square both sides. We do not put a plus or minus, because it does not make sense to have a minus in there. What if I have a 2/3 power? It's actually two questions in one. It's a cube root and a square. This is one of the reasons we like this notation with the fractions, is because it handles all of these nicely. We would write the inverse of 2/3 power is the 3/2 power. And I always say, impress your friends, you actually can figure out what that is, because that means square root and cube. Now the moment we did that, I kind of threw a tricky one in here in the fact that we just did a square root, and I said when you go from a square to a square root, you need a plus or minus. There are two answers. This is stuff we'll kind of talk about in a certain setting later, but it's going to be the square root of 25 is 5, cubed I think is 125. Okay, level 3, we did it. So we have powers and roots, and now we have another level to our problem solving, another button we can push. Okay, so now to the homework questions that have exploded some of my students' universe. Let's bring us all together. Let's do exploding universe. Thanks for sticking with me here. So the problems I assigned, and I don't think too many students were stuck on these ones, but I know that this overlaps with some of the things. were these two problems. Now, I'll have a separate video where I talk about some other details, but there was a problem where somebody had to solve for the cube of the radius of a sphere. These are the things that have popped up this last week. So how do we solve these? So just like before, we're going to simplify our fractions, multiply everything by the denominator. That's going to make this 9 minus x squared equals 0. And then we're going to start doing our inverses to try to get the x squared by itself. So the idea with powers and roots is that's kind of the last thing you're going to do. You try to isolate that and then do it. So we can subtract 9 from both sides. We can divide or multiply by -1. Then we have an even root. And there's two answers. There's the positive square root, which is 3, or the negative square root. And at any time, you can go back to the beginning and make sure your numbers work. What do we do here? We're going to isolate the cube. We're going to so it's 3 inverses. Once you kind of get this idea, it's 3 inverses. So it's not really exploding universe. You're just using all 3 inverses in the right order. There are 3 buttons to push. Even once you get the hang of this, you can sort of realize, okay, I'm starting with 0 on the right. What are the 3 buttons I have to push? Well, the first button is plus 32. That's how I do these. If I was using the calculator like this, I would add 32 to both sides. Okay, I undid that. Then what do? Then I need to divide that answer by 4. I'm undoing the 4. And I get x cubed is 8. And let's just pretend for a second that I don't know what the cube root of 8 is. I can take that answer and raise it to the 1/3 power. So I think I've just found this week that some people have a more complicated view of this. This is not an exploding universe. It's just our toolbox. And for the big part of Math 120, through the first several weeks, that's it. It's a couple little things we'll add, and then later we'll add exponentials and logs, and then later we'll do trig. But at this moment, that's the solving toolbox. It's just a question if you can push the buttons in the right order and do your arithmetic. And so if you're struggling with solving, it's probably the arithmetic piece. I don't want it to be this. All right, hope that helps.